Today I decided I'm gonna write last year's AP US History DBQ, and I'm not sure why. I guess I woke up today and chose violence against myself. But I also really want to make sure that I understand and that you understand the new DBQ rubric, right? Because the College Board threw us for a loop. They heard all of your complaints about how the DBQ was really hard and really overwhelming, and they said, okay, fine, bet. I'll make the rubric significantly easier. So I'm gonna write in real time. I'm not editing this for y'all. There's not gonna be cute little graphics. I'll put timestamps at the bottom if you want to just skip to certain parts of the rubric that I'm working on. But I'm gonna write in real time one of last year's DBQs. Again, there were multiple sets floating around. And I'm gonna do it aligned with the new rubric, and I'm gonna show you and me basically how I would approach this DBQ with this new rubric. And how I think that you can get the most points humanly possible. So if you want to follow along, I'm using set 2. So if you Google APUSH free response question set 2, a PDF will pop up, and I'm using the DBQ. And so we can look here. I actually have not looked at this. I looked at the prompt when they released the exams last summer, and I have not looked at any of the documents since. So I truly am doing this live. Why I decided to do this to myself, especially when I have like this day off school today, I could be doing anything I want. Anyway, so the prompt that we're working with today is evaluate the extent to which the definitions of US citizenship changed from 1865 to 1920. So you're gonna see me working on this little document that I've made. It's very simple, where I keep track of all the different rubric points. This is partly for me. If you're typing the exam, if you're doing the digital exam, this is something you could probably do, or you could even just keep a little checklist off to the side so that you can keep track. Remember, on the exam, they're going to give you a sheet that looks like this on the front that says, hey, in your response, you should do the following, have a thesis, context. So they're going to give you the little checklist, but I like it to be super simple and right where I'm working on my essay. You'll notice that I've color-coded the rubric, and to me, I'm taking the 3 easiest points to get. Those are the ones in green. Thesis statement, just addressing 3 documents gets you a point. And now just using 4 documents gets you a whole other point. That's one of the ways that they made it easier. Used to get that second point, you had to use 6 documents. Now you only have to use 4, and you could in theory get complete credit if you wanted to. Then in the yellow, those are the 3 rubric points that are a little bit trickier. They're a little bit more unlikely to grant, right? I mean, like honestly, the graders are more likely to give you the point for the ones in green, but then they're going to be a little bit more discerning with the ones in yellow. And so with that context, an additional piece of evidence, or evaluating or HIPPing 2 documents. Again, this is another big change. Used to, you had to evaluate or HIPP, I believe, 4 documents to get that 1 point. Now it's only 2. That's very kind, and I'm really glad they made that change, because we don't need you to evaluate the source of 4 documents to tell if you can do it, right? We need you to do it maybe twice to know it wasn't a fluke the first time. The big one is complexity. They have finally removed the unicorn of it all, and they have established like some clear parameters for what could earn complexity. Now, this is the first year that we're going to be working with this rubric, so I would just say right now, I wouldn't count your chickens before they hatch. I still think they're going to be very hesitant to give out the complexity point. So they have said that if a student uses all 7 documents to support their argument, they could earn complexity. And if a student HIPs 4 documents, evaluates the source of 4 documents, then there's still, I think, the old school complexity floating around. If a grader just reads your essay and is like, whoa, you've really like connected all these things together and you really like understand this at a broader level, I believe they can still give you the complexity point for that. The thing I will say is the bar is going to be so high. So it's not just like you check off the box, you've used all 7 documents. It's like, you've used them well. You've really clearly applied them, right? So again, I still am going to use my same approach. If you've ever watched me write DBQs before, I take essentially a Frankenstein approach, or a first draft, second draft approach. So what I do is I first try to get a basic essay down on the page that at least includes these green rubric points, that at least includes a basic argument using now 4 documents and has a thesis statement. Then I look at the time and see how much time I have left, and I go back in and add as many more points until time runs out, right? And you can do this whether you're handwriting or typing. Starting in 2024, 2025, everyone's gonna be typing, so this is gonna make it easy for you. Okay, so I'm gonna give myself maximum like 10 minutes to skim through the documents before I just jump in and start getting out like the bare bones of my basic essay. So the first thing I wanna do is I wanna type out, again, the prompt. I wanna have the prompt visible to me at all times. So evaluate the extent to which the definitions of U.S. citizenship changed from 1865 to 1920. And I'm going to even highlight, we're talking about definitions of U.S. citizenship. I'm going to make this one even bigger. We're looking at whether or not it changed. And we're specifically talking about 1865 to 1920. Again, in AP US history, dates are important. They're at least important so that you know what you can and can't include as evidence in an essay. Now, what I want to do here is I want to take 30 seconds and think through anything I might already know about this topic. So definitions of US citizenship from 1865 to 1920. Well, I know 1865 is the end of the Civil War. 1920, end of the kind of progressive era, beginning of the Roaring 20s. So, I mean, a big one is going to be, which amendment is that? The 14th Amendment, I know, is going to give basically like Black people are citizens, right? I know that that's going to occur. Beyond that, I actually don't really know a ton about this topic. So that's the only thing I can think of. I'm going to assume there's going to be a document about that. But if not, I've kind of brainstormed some additional evidence I can bring in. But again, if nothing else, you just want to situate your brain. You're going, okay, we're talking about like the Reconstruction era, the Gilded Age, the Progressive era. That's what we're talking about. So I do know, for example, during the Gilded Age, there was a ton of like new immigrants coming in. I know that was a thing that's going to affect citizenship. I also know this is a period of the so-called Indian Wars. So there's gonna be questions about indigenous citizenship. Like if you're on a reservation, are you a citizen? And I know we're talking about the Progressive era, which, you know, tried to like expand rights for some Americans. So those are just some predictions. Again, if nothing else, just get these ideas out of your brain because you'll be surprised as soon as you start looking at the documents, that's all you're gonna be able to think about. And you're gonna forget anything else that you knew that was floating out there that could be potential context or additional evidence. Okay, now I'm gonna go through really quickly and I'm gonna try to find, again, at least 4 documents I understand. Now, if I want to be safe, I'm gonna make sure I use 5 documents, right? Because you get the point for using 4. That gives you some leeway in case you mess one up, because students always mess up a document. You'd be surprised. You might just be going really fast and misinterpret a document or just not explain yourself well enough, and they're gonna go, I'm not really sure. So you wanna maybe always use one more than you need for the point. Okay, so if I get to a document that I just like straight up don't understand, for now I'm gonna skip it. That is the real value of this new rubric, is your ability to skip documents. Because in theory, if they give you 7, we ideally want to use 5. You can just outright skip 2 documents. If there's 2 that you get to, you're like, I don't get what this is. You like don't ever have to think about it again, which is kind of nice. Okay, document 1, I'm going to read the source information word for word. Sojourner Truth, I know her. Speech given at the meeting of American Equal Rights Association. So I'm just going to, Sojourner Truth, Equal Rights Association, 1867. And the goal here is that I want to like make it to where it's easy for me to refer back to these kind of little notes that I'm taking, so I don't have to keep going back and reading the whole document over and over again. My friends, I'm rejoiced. I don't know how you'll feel when I get through. Okay, I have bad news coming, basically. I come from another field, the country of the slave. They have their liberty. So much good luck to have slavery partly destroyed, not entirely. I want it root and branch destroyed, then we will all be free. There's a great stir about colored men getting their rights, but not a word about women. Okay, so this is referencing what I talked about. So this is like Black men's rights, including right to vote, which is gonna be the 15th Amendment, but nothing for women yet. It's gonna be a big one. She also mentions, although it doesn't really relate to the topic, but I'm gonna put it in there anyway. She mentions slavery partly abolished, which is kind of a reference to the 13th Amendment being like, hey, no slavery unless as punishment for a crime. Okay, I'm gonna skim through. I have been 40 years a slave and 40 years free and would be here 40 years more to have equal rights for all. There ought to be equal rights now more than ever since Black people have got their freedom. Okay, so she's just bringing up this kind of women's rights argument of saying, I'm so glad that we've abolished slavery for the most part. I'm so glad that we're giving Black men the right to vote. What about women? Okay. And so here the issue would be like, the real question, I'm going to put in caps, are women citizens? 14th Amendment says yes. It says if you were born in this country, you're a citizen, but with no right to vote. So that's kind of my big idea coming out of document 1. Great. Document 2, Commissioner of Indian Affairs. Indian Affairs Report, 1887. So this is like on the tail end of the Indian Wars. Can we call them that? Indian Wars. Normally we would say indigenous people. It is a matter not only of importance but necessity that Indians acquire the English language. The great work of educating and citizenizing the Indians. I've never heard that word before. Great work of educating, I like that quote, citizenizing the Indians. Okay. The adults are expected to assume the role of citizens, the rising generation, to fill the measure of citizenship. We want them to read, write, and speak the English language. So must know English to exercise citizenship rights, I guess, is what they're saying. Deeming it for the very best interest. Oh, both as an individual and as an embryo citizen. Does that mean like a brand new emerging citizen? To have this policy strictly enforced. Schools on Indian reservations. So we're talking about Indian boarding schools. Toward teaching the Indians the mischief and folly of continuing their barbarous practices to teach them the English language. Okay, so that's going to be my like kind of big idea from this one, right? Is going to be basically you're not actually truly considered a citizen by the US government unless you know English, which isn't anywhere in the Constitution, but it's clearly like a policy of this federal government. Okay, document 3, Supreme Court, US versus Wong Kim Ark. I've never heard of this before. Okay, Supreme Court ruling in 1898. The fact that acts of Congress or treaties have not permitted Chinese persons born out of this country to become citizens cannot exclude Chinese persons born in this country from the operation. All persons born in the U.S. are citizens. Okay, wait. The evident intention of the submission of this case, God, I hate Supreme Court rulings. They're so confusing. To the decision of the court upon the facts agreed by the parties were to present for determination the single question, oh my God, get to the point. Namely, the question is whether a child born in the U.S. of parents of Chinese descent who at the time of his birth were subjects of the Emperor of China but live permanently in the U.S., are they a citizen, that kid? The court is of the opinion that the question must be answered in the affirmative. And the way they've worded that, I'm still not quite sure how they've ruled. So they're asking, is a child who was born in the U.S. to Chinese parents a citizen? And they say yes. Okay. Chinese American born in U.S. is a citizen, even if parents are not. Okay. Wow. Good work, Supreme Court. 1898. Okay. I unfortunately would have expected differently. Okay, document 4, Supreme Court ruling Downs versus Bidwell. Again, never heard of this before. Remember, this is the point of the DBQ, is like, the whole point is they're testing to see, like, can you not know the answer to a question? And can you figure it out? And can you be given a document you've never seen before and figure it out? So don't freak out when you get a question or documents that you're like, I never learned about this. I've never heard of the Supreme Court ruling, right? So the whole idea is, do you have the skills to be a historian? Can you figure out what they're talking about? So this is another Supreme Court decision in 1901. We are also of the opinion that the power to acquire territory by treaty, okay, this sort of Spanish-American War stuff, implies not only the power to govern, but to prescribe upon what terms the U.S. will receive its inhabitants and what their status shall be. So, okay, we're talking about our inhabitants of new American colonies, citizens, is like the question we're getting at here. Indeed, it's doubtful if Congress would ever assent to the annexation of territory upon the condition that its inhabitants shall become at once citizens of the U.S., meaning like Congress is on the opinion of no. Just because we annex the Philippines or add the Philippines as a colony, let's say, doesn't mean we're giving all Filipino people citizenship. In all its treaties, the treaty-making power has made special provisions for this subject. In all these cases, there's an implied denial of the right of the inhabitants to American citizenship. It's obvious that in the annexation of blah, 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 great questions will arise, blah, 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 which may require action on the part of Congress that would be quite unnecessary in the annexation of contiguous territory inhabited only by people of the same race. What? Okay, I don't actually understand what the Supreme Court is deciding here, but they are saying Congress has said no with past treaties. Like, it's been clear in the way they've arranged past treaties, they've said no. Okay, this is like an I'm not sure. I'm going to put this like in italics or something because I might be misreading this document. I'm not actually totally clear if they're deciding something here. So I'm going to skip it for now, and I'll come back if I feel like I want to use it. But again, this is the power of that new rubric. I can feel very confident skipping one or two. Du Bois, I love Du Bois. Okay. A philosophy for, this is in The Crisis, which was his magazine. I'm by birth and law a free Black American citizen. I have rights and duties. Okay. I will not, because of inertia, allow new discrimination to become usual. I will make it my duty to assert my right to vote. Okay. Black men should assert their right to vote. Full citizens shouldn't accept, and then I think he said new discriminations. I will be a man and know myself to be one, even among those who secretly and openly deny my manhood. Okay, so this is just Du Bois's philosophy as we know it, right? Of him just saying like, no, we're not doing baby steps. We're not gonna just like be grateful for like the little, kernels of freedom that white America is giving us. You said we're citizens, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, we're citizens, we can vote, we're doing it now. Great. Document 6 is an act I've never heard of before. Great. Act in 1917. Oh, about Puerto Rico. Okay, so again, this is like this question. We could actually connect this to document 4 if we could figure out what document 4 was saying. Fingers crossed. No law shall be enacted in Puerto Rico which shall deprive any people of life, liberty, or property, due process. All citizens of Puerto Rico and all natives of Puerto Rico, if they're not citizens of any foreign country, are now citizens. Ooh, caps. All citizens of PR are now citizens of US. Wow, big deal. That all judicial process shall run in the name of the United States. Okay, so this is fully like giving Puerto Rico this limbo status of like, you are not a separate colony, you are a territory, you are a part of us, your people are citizens. Still, they're not a state, right? So there's this distance there, but okay, that's like a pretty clear-cut document. And finally, document 7 is an image. Thank the Lord. National Americanization Day. Oh God, I'm gonna hate this. Okay. Make the 4th of July Americanization Day. This makes me want a hot dog real bad. Okay. Many people, but one nation. Great. I mean, I already kind of get the vibe of this, but I want to see if I can read any of this little. Make our 13 million immigrants feel that they're part of and have a share in American institutions. Pledge allegiance. Help others become American first. Okay. So duty of, I'm going to put native in quotes, native citizens to Americanize immigrants. Okay. Oh, cool. So I understand all but one. That document 4, I'm still not really clear what they were talking about. So now what I'm going to think through is, do I see any that can be grouped together? And the answer is yes, I do. So again, I'm looking at this for the first time. I'm seeing like laws that are declaring that like all these people are citizens. But then I'm seeing documents that are going, but we're not actually being treated like citizens. So what I'm seeing is I could talk about maybe in two paragraphs, I could talk about like the contradiction between what the law is saying or the Supreme Court or the Constitution is saying versus what people are actually experiencing. So legal citizenship, which is like, I'm gonna say like, technically legal citizenship, I would talk about document 3, Chinese American born is a citizen. I would talk about document 6, residents of Puerto Rico are citizens. And I would also talk about document 1. I'm probably going to use document 1 on both sides, but she's referencing the 14th Amendment gave us citizenship rights. Okay. And then I'm going to say like social discrimination, basically. Like, so even though we're technically citizens, we're still not being treated as such. So document 2, must know English. Document 5, Du Bois is saying like, basically we are facing new discriminations. Document 7, we have to Americanize. And then I could use document 1 again and talk about what about women? Oh, great. I don't even need to use document 4. Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. If I want for that complexity, maybe I'll try. I'm now like 20 minutes in. I have 40 minutes left. Now I'm gonna start writing. And what I want you to notice that I'm doing is, all I've done is the bare bones. I've gone through the documents, I've picked out the ones I understand, and I've figured out a basic organization. Here's paragraph 1, here's paragraph 2. I have not really considered yet, might I evaluate these sources, or what should I do for context? I'm not getting hung up on that yet. This is my approach to the DBQs and the LEQs, is to get the basic points, the easiest points, thesis and using the documents, get those down on the page first, right? You're also, it's gonna calm you down a little bit. You're gonna be like, oh, right, okay, I already have like 3 points out of the 7, this is great. Then I'll go back and add in the more complex stuff. So what I'm just gonna do is I'm gonna write a really simplistic thesis statement. So I'm gonna say, between 1865 and 1920, many more groups were legally incorporated as US citizens, okay? However, those groups still faced a lot of discrimination and lack of rights despite their legal status. I think that makes sense. Again, the first thesis is, it's like the first pancake. It's not great. I will probably go back and edit that, or I might in my conclusion write it again once I'm more clear in my head what I'm arguing. So now I'm gonna get the bare bones. I'm gonna get like a topic sentence, use the documents. A topic sentence, use the documents. That's all I'm doing. So there were many Supreme Court decisions, laws, and amendments that granted legal citizenship to new groups. That's my topic sentence. Technically, this did happen. So then I'm gonna say, I'm gonna talk about which one's document 3. In 1898, the Supreme Court clarified that anyone born in the United States, regardless of the citizenship status of their parents, was a legal citizen. In this case, the court was specifically talking about Chinese Americans whose status was in doubt because, I'm going more into detail than I need to, but this is good. I'm actually talking about like the context of this document. I just want to make sure that the grader knows that I know that the Supreme Court didn't actually say anyone born. They're specifically saying this Chinese American person. But in this case, the court was specifically talking about Chinese Americans whose status was in doubt because Chinese immigration had recently been banned. Document 3. That's all I'm going to do for now. Okay. Which one's document 6? Similarly, oh, I bet I could bring in document 4 here for this. I could say the Supreme Court had been struggling with the question of whether or not residents of newly acquired territories were also citizens. And I'm going to throw document 4 in there because I got that. They were struggling with that in document 4. I don't quite know what side they came down on, but I know they were struggling with it. Okay. In 1917, Congress clarified for citizens of Puerto Rico that they were U.S. citizens bound by the Constitution. I'm going to just add a little however. However, nope, I'm going to wait because that's actually going to be a good transition for the next paragraph. And I'm actually going to go back. I think I'm going to start with the 14th Amendment. So I'm going to go back and put my cursor here. And I'm going to say, in the wake of the Civil War, the 14th Amendment defined citizenship for the first time as anyone born or naturalized. I'm just going to say born. I don't know if that's true. Born in the United States. I'm just going to go document 1 because I got that. Well, I knew that, but I also got that from document 1. Okay, so now I've done document 1. I've said the Supreme Court established this Chinese American person was a citizen. They'd been struggling with the question, and I used document 4 for that. And in 1917, they clarified that Puerto Rico, those people were citizens, which is document 6. Okay, again, I'm getting the bare bones there. I don't feel like I've like fully explained that but I do feel like I've addressed these documents and I've like used them in a simple way to prove my point. right? This is what I mean when I say kind of Frankensteining or doing like a first draft, second draft. I'm not like super happy with that paragraph, but I've gotten my ideas out there. And guess what? If I've used all these successfully, 1, 2, 3, 4, I've already used 4. So if I've done enough in that paragraph, which I'm not sure if I have, then I've already gotten myself a 3 out of 7, 1 for thesis, and then I've used 4 documents. If nothing else, it just helps get some of these basic ideas out of my brain and onto the paper. So then when I come back, I can focus on refining it, making it more complex. All right, paragraph 2. However, just because someone was technically a citizen on paper did not mean they were granted the full rights and freedoms of other U.S. citizens. The Bureau of Indian Affairs clearly dictates that Indigenous Americans cannot be citizens until they read, write, speak in English. This was the main purpose of the early Indian boarding schools. Step 1 of the citizenship process was to undo, and I'm putting this in quotes, barbarous practices and assimilate Indigenous Americans into white English-speaking culture. Okay, and that's document 2. Document 5. Du Bois was one of the most fervent to point out, I'm going to put in quotes again, new discriminations against Black men, despite their technically equal status granted to them by the 14th and 15th Amendments. Yep. Document 5. Again, I'm trying to just like not overthink it first. All existing U.S. citizens were encouraged to take part in this assimilation process. I actually want to put this, I'm going to move this, I want to put this next to the Indigenous part, because I think that makes more sense. All existing U.S. citizens were encouraged to take part in this, what was the word he used? Citizenization or something? It was like a wild word, I can't remember. Citizenizing. Take part in this effort to citizenize new arrivals by, and then I'm trying to see if I can get something from this poster, by helping them see themselves as Americans first. The implication being they should leave their original culture, language, practices behind to become a true American. Great, and that's document 7. Then I have Du Bois talking about discrimination against Black men. Sojourner Truth takes this argument even further by pointing out that women have been entirely forgotten from this conversation on citizenship, since they do not have the right to vote. Document 1. Great. Okay, my basic essay is there. Is it great? No. Is it fine? Yes. So the idea here is I have a basic thesis statement and I have my 2 arguments, and now I can take a deep breath. I have 30 minutes left. I'm not going to use all 30 minutes because I got other things I want to do, and I don't think y'all want to watch for like a full hour as I just vamp and try to fill time. But what I want to do is I want to use a little bit of the time that I have left to now see where can I go in and supplement and add and make it even better, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my little rubric, and I'm going to go, okay, I feel pretty confident that I have a thesis. I definitely addressed 3 documents. I think I used 4 documents because I think I used 6, or even, I think I used all 7, but I don't, to be clear, I don't think I used all 7 well enough to get the complexity point. This is the big question, is like, Are they just going to grant me the point because I technically used all 7 documents in a way that was correct? My suspicion is no, that this is going to need to be a really complex argument with 7 documents. So I don't think I've fully done that, but I think I have technically used all 7 documents. Now I'm going to think about these other points. And to me, the next 2 points that are the easiest to get are context and additional evidence, because those both just require one thing. You just have one discussion of context and you get a point. So let's think about context. How could I contextualize? I mean, this seems pretty straightforward. I could talk about citizenship before 1865. And I think I might, well, I would want to use the 14th Amendment, but I don't know if I've already used that too much in my essay. But I'm just going to talk about general like xenophobia since the beginning. So I don't want to go too far back and make too much work for myself, but the founding fathers, I'm still going to go pretty far back, clearly had a vision for, this is like too broad. This is too broad. What am I doing? I'm doing the thing I tell my students not to do. Like, don't get too artsy with this, okay? Despite almost 100 years as a country, before 1865, there was no technical definition for who could be considered a citizen of the United States. The decision was typically left to the discretion of whoever was manning the voting booth or whoever controlled local politics. What this means is that, for the most part, the only people who truly could exercise full citizenship rights, like voting, were white men. And that's just true. You can come at me, YouTube, in the comments for being like anti-male, but that's just true. It was like, if you appeared as a white man, if you spoke English, if you weren't Catholic, right? And maybe I'll just even add that in, kind of like white Protestant men. However, as the US grew in size and population over the 19th century, and as millions of immigrants came to the country to take advantage of the emerging American dream, I want to add something on industrialization, came to the industrializing country. Notice what I'm doing. I'm trying to include as much information here where I'm like, I know what I'm talking about. I'm not just BSing. I'm not just making this stuff up. I know I'm talking specifically about because the Industrial Revolution is why people came. This is where some students go wrong with context, is they're too vague. They're just like, citizenship has been vague up until this point, but now there's new people here. What do we do? And it's like, well, that's true. But with context, you want to be as specific as possible because it can trend, again, a little artsy, a little metaphorical. And we just want to know, like, what do you know? Do you understand how we got to this point where your essay is going to start? Okay. To take advantage of the emerging American dream. So, however, as the US grew in size and as millions of immigrants came to the industrialized country, there were more discussions about citizenship than ever before between 1865 and 1920. So again, I'm like bringing it exactly there. And then I'm just going to throw my dinky little thesis statement there. Between, many more groups were legally incorporated as U.S. citizens. However, those groups still faced a lot of discrimination and lack of rights despite their legal status. I feel good about that thesis. I didn't think it was great at first, but I think it's totally fine. I feel pretty confident I got the context point now, right? So now I'm looking at the clock and going, additional evidence in theory is either the easiest or the hardest point, because if you just happen to know something that's additional evidence, then it's super easy. You just add it in. It's just one thing. But if you can't think of anything, you can't think of anything. So my additional evidence would have been the 14th Amendment, but that's clearly included in here. What I want to do is I want to go back to my brainstorm before 14th Amendment, Black people citizens, that was already discussed. Gilded Age new immigrants, I kind of use that in context, but I could talk about it more. Actually, yeah, I could. I already mentioned Catholic. I could talk about discrimination against Catholic people. So I'm going to throw that in this paragraph. And I'm going to say, for many immigrants speaking English and appearing white still wasn't enough to gain full rights. Catholics, especially coming from Ireland and Italy, were often lumped into the same boat as Black Americans in the Jim Crow South or other discriminated groups in the industrializing North. Businesses often displayed signs saying Nina, no Irish need apply. And in the Jim Crow South, there were instances of Italian Americans being lynched. Okay, I want to make sure though that I'm connecting this back to citizenship rights. If all US citizens are guaranteed the right to life, liberty, and property, there were many groups, including Indigenous, I'm gonna like wrap this up now, Indigenous, Black, and Catholic Americans. If all US citizens are guaranteed the right to life, liberty, and property, there were many groups who were left out of this guarantee. Okay, great. So I feel pretty good that that's specific enough to be an additional piece of evidence. I can talk about it more, but I don't really want to, and I don't really need to. So now I feel pretty confident I have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 HIPP. I'm not going to HIPP 4 documents. I'm not even going to go for complexity. If they want to give it to me, because I technically used all 7 documents, that's very kind of them. But I'm just, before I wrap up, I am going to HIPP 2 documents, and then I'm going to wrap it up there and feel good that I've attempted a 6. So this is the part where I'm going to go actually back into the documents. I'm going to look at the source information and try to find 2 that are very clear to me. Find 2 that kind of jump out to you as a potential bias, something interesting that you could discuss about the source itself. So Sojourner Truth has a really interesting point of view, but she includes a lot of that in her speech. So I don't really know that I have a lot to add to that, although, well, that's not true. Okay, let me go and take some notes. I could do, for HIPP, I could talk about the suffrage movement. That would be like, historical situation would be women's suffrage, Susan B. Anthony. I could maybe do that. Let me see if there's better ones. Commissioner of Indian Affairs, 1887. I mean, the context, like the historical situation of this document is the end of the Indian Wars. For example, I know Wounded Knee occurred in this year or just a few years before. No, Wounded Knee's in 1890. Will occur in 1890. That could be interesting to discuss, that like violence is still being committed for people who are not like submitting entirely to the US government. Again, this Chinese American citizenship, I kind of already did that. What I think I could do is I could go back and really tease that out a little bit more, because I said in this case, the court is specifically talking about Chinese Americans whose status was in doubt because Chinese immigration had recently been banned. I've already started kind of talking about the historical situation of that specific document, so I think I should just work on that a little bit and add a little bit more detail there. I'm going to pull in some AP World History context. With the Qing Dynasty in collapse, millions of Chinese immigrants came to the west coast of the United States in search of labor. These immigrants were incredibly helpful, especially at building our transcontinental railroad and helping establish service industry businesses in the former frontier of California. I'm going to move where I say like, hey, document 3, I'm going to move it up here because I've already addressed document 3. I wanted to kind of be clear, like I'm not doing something cool, right? I'm talking about historical context. Unfortunately, white settlers in the West grew worried about becoming outnumbered by Asian immigrants, and so they petitioned Congress to pass our first ever immigration law, the the Chinese Exclusion Act. Okay, I feel like that's plenty. That's what I mean, by the way, or that's what the College Board means when they say, like, evaluate the historical situation of the document. They don't mean, like, a lot of students will be like, the historical situation of this document is immigrants coming in. And it's like, well, that's the historical situation of this entire DBQ. What they want to know is, what's the historical situation of this specific Supreme Court decision? Why are we specifically talking about Chinese Americans? Why is that the big question? Well, it's because I happen to know about the Chinese Exclusion Act, and I happen to know about that kind of racism that developed in the West. So again, otherwise it's just general context. We want to know specific to this document. Okay, so now I feel pretty good that I've done one of them. Now I want to think through what's the other document that I think I could evaluate pretty successfully. Document 4 I'm going to skip because I didn't understand it. Du Bois, I know. I know his point of view. We teach it every year. I'm going to go to wherever I talked about Du Bois, document 5. All right, Du Bois was one of the most fervent to point out new discriminations against Black men, despite their technically equal status granted to them. Du Bois took a much more direct approach to fighting for Black rights, partly because of his personal background. So again, I'm kind of just signaling to the reader, like, hey, I'm about to talk about his point of view. Whereas many Black leaders living in the Jim Crow South, like Booker T. Washington, advocated a slower approach, focus on economic opportunity first, and then address political and societal discrimination later. God, I write these huge run-on sentences. I don't need to do whereas. I'll just do many Black leaders living in the Jim Crow South advocated a slower approach, blah, blah, blah. However, Du Bois was raised in the North, and I actually happen to know this about him, descended from a family of free Black people whose ancestry goes back to the American Revolution. It's actually really interesting. I believe his great whatever grandfather fought in the Revolution as a Black man. He also was the first Black person to receive a PhD from Harvard. From Du Bois's point of view, he has clearly checked all the boxes of being a true American citizen. And the fact that he and his people are still being kept out is unacceptable to him. I think that's enough. Again, do you need to know all this stuff about Du Bois? No, but you'd want to know, if you're going to evaluate the point of view of a person, you need to know who that person is. That's like a good rule. You can't just be like, the speaker is a politician, so he's biased because he wants votes. That's not enough. Well, if you're going to evaluate, same thing, if you're going to evaluate historical situation, you need to be able to tie it specifically to what is being talked about in that document. If you're going to talk about point of view, you need to know who that person is. I would not evaluate the point of view of someone you don't know, unless they give you like a long little definition of this person who was the first blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. But typically, I would only evaluate point of view if it's someone you've actually learned about and you actually know some things about. That's why, like, Sojourner Truth is someone that I could have discussed, but honestly, she kind of included her background enough in there that I don't know if I would have gotten points. Okay, so I feel very good. I feel good that I have a 6. I think I probably messed something up and maybe end up with a 5. Remember, we're not shooting for a perfect score. Out of 7, if you're getting a 4 or a 5 out of 7, you're doing great. That's really, really good. If you're getting a 3 out of 7, that's fine. I would just make sure you feel pretty good about how you did on the rest of the test. You do not need a 7 out of 7 to do well on the AP exam. And in fact, I found that a lot of students who try to do all 7 points all at once, they struggle more. Notice that what I did was very strategic, right? I started with the easiest points and I kind of earned those right away, grab up those points, then go back and keep adding in the more and more difficult points to earn, so that even if time runs out and I'm midway through a sentence, I know that I have attempted at least 6 points. What some students will do is they will sit there and plan and plan and plan and plan and think and think and think, and then they start writing a superb, complex essay, but time runs out and they're only halfway through, so they've only really earned maybe half the points that they could have. So with that, I will post this that I just wrote I will post this whole document that I just used on my website, antisocialstudies.org, if you want to like look at this, if you want to kind of use this to help you. And good luck. I hope that this was really helpful. I hope that if nothing else, you recognize that this newer DBQ rubric really works in your favor. It's the same skills that you've probably been working on if you've taken any other AP history classes, but you don't need to show those skills like 7 times now. You can show them 4. It's the same thing like in a math class. Is like, instead of having to do like 20 of the same type of question over and over again, we're only making you do it 5 times to prove that you know how to do it. So again, I would be encouraged. Remember that they can't take any points away from you, right? There's no place on the rubric where a grader can subtract points. Once you've earned a point, you've earned that point, you can't lose it. So when in doubt, just try. When in doubt, put something on the page. If it's wrong, worst case, they'll just cross it out and it won't count for you, but it also won't count against you. So with that, good luck on the AP exam. Check out my website for a bunch of review materials and resources. Check out some old videos where I walk through other DBQs and other LEQs that you'll also find helpful. And good luck in May.